Iran backed into a corner. Protests appear poised to erupt diplomatic farce. Iran, accused of nuclear violations, still holds NPT leadership. UAE leaves OPEC. Old oil order fractures. Russia faces new pressure. Ukraine strikes deep into Russia. The war is shifting to the rear areas. The recent ceasefire has not delivered the stability many expected. The latest development suggests pressure on Tehran is intensifying strain on three fronts: military, economic, and internal political. President Donald Trump said on April 28 that Iran had reached out to Washington and described the regime as being under severe internal strain. According to Trump, Iranian officials want the United States to reopen the Strait of Hormuz quickly in order to buy time to manage their domestic crisis. If that statement reflects reality, it would be a rare signal that Tehran is under far greater pressure than it has publicly acknowledged. When a country asks its rival to loosen control over its own vital maritime lifeline, the problem is usually no longer confined to the battlefield. It has already spread into the machinery of power itself. For weeks, the US administration has reportedly intensified its maximum pressure campaign against Tehran. The focus has gone beyond financial sanctions, expanding instead to oil exports and access to strategic shipping corridors. For Iran, both are essential lifelines. Oil provides revenue, while sea lanes keep money flowing into the economy. The most important choke point remains the Strait of Hormuz. It is the gateway connecting the Persian Gulf to the outside world and one of the most important energy transit routes on Earth. Much of the Middle East's exported oil passes through it. For Iran, Hormuz has long been more than a trade route. It has also been a strategic deterrent tool. However, as naval superiority tilts toward the United States, the value of Hormuz also changes. Instead of serving as Tehran's leverage, the area could become a point of constriction. That would mean Iran loses revenue, while also seeing its bargaining space shrink. Washington is turning naval dominance into direct political leverage over Tehran. Even so, Tehran has not abandoned efforts to buy time. According to the sources cited, Iran has submitted a new proposal through intermediaries in Pakistan. The offer reportedly centers on reopening the strait in exchange for easing the blockade, while continuing to delay direct talks over the nuclear program. Washington is said to be dissatisfied with that approach and believes the proposal does not address the core issue. This reflects the familiar deadlock between both sides. The United States wants the nuclear file resolved first. Iran wants economic pressure lifted first. Neither side wants to concede on its most important issue before the other takes concrete action. As negotiations stall, economic pressure on Iran continues to rise rapidly. Reports indicate Tehran is resorting to temporary measures to manage unsold excess crude, including restarting old facilities, using temporary storage sites, converting aging tankers into floating storage, and attempting to move oil to China by rail or container. If accurate, it suggests Iran's energy system is operating in an emergency defensive posture. Some assessments warn the country's oil storage capacity could hit its limits within weeks if exports are not restored. At that point, Tehran would face difficult choices: cut production, accept technical damage, or make broader concessions at the negotiating table. This is a serious problem because oil remains the financial backbone of Iran. When that revenue stream is blocked, inflation, budget deficits, currency depreciation, and social unrest can emerge at the same time. Meanwhile, the Arab Gulf states are also preparing for the worst-case scenario. Leaders of the Gulf Cooperation Council met in Saudi Arabia to discuss security risks from Iran, particularly UAV and missile attacks if the conflict reignites. Their continued high alert suggests they do not view the current ceasefire as a durable peace. In practical terms, for Gulf oil exporters, even a few days of disruption at the Strait of Hormuz would be enough to destabilize energy markets and threaten national security. That is why, even with the guns temporarily silent, they are still preparing for the next round of escalation. Iran is now under pressure both externally and internally. If no workable agreement is reached, Tehran could soon enter a phase harsher than previous rounds of sanctions. Protests appear poised to erupt in Iran. Tehran holds emergency meeting over risk of nationwide unrest. Inside Iran, another potentially decisive front is emerging: the risk of widespread social instability. Iran International, citing informed sources, reported that Iran's Supreme National Security Council held an emergency meeting to assess the possibility of renewed protests in the coming days. The emergency meeting itself suggests Tehran views this as a serious threat to domestic stability. According to internal reports presented during the meeting, security officials are concerned about soaring prices, high unemployment, and severe damage to key industries such as oil and gas, petrochemicals, and steel. Many production facilities have reportedly shut down or are operating well below capacity, leading to widespread job losses. Some assessments suggest restoring those sectors could take years, meaning Iran may be facing not only a short-term shock, but the risk of prolonged decline. More notably, sources said Iran's economy may not be able to withstand more than 6 to 8 weeks if the naval blockade continues. The blockade reportedly began on April 13th and had lasted roughly 2 weeks at the time of the broadcast. If these reports hold, Tehran may now be entering a phase of rapidly intensifying economic pressure as trade disruptions deepen and revenues fall. Another major variable is the impact of prolonged internet disruptions. According to internal estimates, around 20% of workers dependent on the online economy have already lost jobs or income. The report also warned that another 2 million private sector workers could lose employment by late spring if current trends continue. This points to growing public frustration spreading beyond the working class and into the urban middle class as well. The reported paralysis of banks, stock exchanges, gold markets, and foreign exchange trading has also clogged large parts of the economy. When people can no longer determine the real value of goods or currency, panic and hoarding often rise sharply, conditions that can quickly trigger social unrest. Sources also said officials are particularly concerned about the possibility of exiled former Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi calling for nationwide demonstrations. At the same time, International Workers' Day is approaching as workers, teachers, and retirees continue protesting over unpaid wages, rising living costs, and economic insecurity. This is another sign that public frustration is spreading across society. According to conclusions reportedly presented at the meeting, public protests now appear increasingly difficult to avoid. The only uncertainty may be timing. Tehran is facing the risk that external pressure could transform into domestic instability. If those two forces converge, the real question may no longer be whether protests erupt, but how large they will be. Diplomatic farce. Iran accused of nuclear violations, still given an NPT leadership role. While Iran is already under heavy military, economic, and internal pressure, another development at the United Nations has created a striking contradiction. On April 28th, Tehran announced that it had been elected vice president of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty Review Conference in New York City. What has led many observers to call this a diplomatic farce is that in 2025, the International Atomic Energy Agency passed a resolution finding Iran in violation of its nuclear non-proliferation obligations, for the first time since 2005, citing failures to fully declare nuclear material and activities at multiple sites. A country facing scrutiny over nuclear transparency has now been handed a leadership role at the very forum, tasked with overseeing the treaty on the non-proliferation of nuclear weapons. Tehran will likely use the move as a diplomatic victory to argue that it has not been isolated. But for countries critical of Iran, it raises serious questions about the consistency and credibility of the international system. UAE leaves OPEC. The old oil order is fracturing and Russia faces new pressure. While global attention remains on the Strait of Hormuz and the risk of renewed escalation between the United States and Iran, another quieter development with potentially long-term consequences has emerged in global energy markets. On April 28th, the United Arab Emirates announced plans to withdraw from OPEC and the broader OPEC Plus coalition, marking a major turning point in Abu Dhabi's oil policy. If fully implemented, this would be more than a technical production decision. It would reflect increasingly visible cracks inside the oil coordination structure that has shaped global markets for decades. Officially, the UAE says it needs greater flexibility to expand investment and increase production based on market conditions. After years of upgrading its production capacity, Abu Dhabi wants to use its spare output potential, rather than remain constrained by collective quotas. Put simply, the UAE wants to determine its own growth pace instead of waiting for bloc-wide consensus. Behind the economic argument, however, lies a question of power. For years, Saudi Arabia has held the central role inside OPEC due to its massive production scale and unmatched ability to rapidly adjust supply. For the UAE, continuing to accept quotas below its actual capacity has meant sacrificing part of its national interest to preserve an order led by Riyadh. That helps explain why tensions between Abu Dhabi and Riyadh have simmered for years. From quota allocations and production increases to broader regional geopolitical priorities, the two capitals have not always been fully aligned. The decision to leave OPEC may therefore signal that the UAE wants a more independent energy strategy. At the market level, the most immediate consequence is that supply can become harder to predict. When a major producer steps outside a production quota system, it gains more room to pump aggressively if prices are attractive or if it wants to capture market share. That is especially significant at a time when oil prices have recently faced downward pressure. If Abu Dhabi raises output substantially, the pain could fall on countries more dependent on oil revenues, especially Russia. For years, Moscow has relied on the OPEC Plus mechanism to coordinate supply cuts and keep prices at levels supportive of the federal budget, while carrying the costs of war and Western sanctions. If that alliance weakens, Russia's leverage weakens with it. Based on the figures cited, Russian oil and gas revenues have already come under heavy pressure in recent months, while budget deficits have widened. If prices remain weak or global supply rises further, Moscow could face a deeper budget squeeze. The reality is, this is not just about money. For Russia, oil and gas are also strategic tools used to preserve domestic economic stability, fund defense spending, and maintain foreign influence. As revenues narrow, the Kremlin's room to maneuver narrows as well. Conversely, the development could offer advantages to Donald Trump in Washington. Trump has long criticized OPEC for manipulating oil prices and has repeatedly urged Gulf producers to raise output in order to lower global energy costs. If OPEC becomes more fragmented, America's goal of lower prices and abundant supply becomes easier to achieve. Lower energy prices would also support the U.S. economy, ease inflation pressure, and expand policy flexibility at a time of intensifying geopolitical competition. From a long-term perspective, the UAE's decision may signal a shift from a model of collective discipline to one of flexible competition among oil exporters. In this new environment, countries may prioritize national interests more than the shared stability of the traditional cartel. The UAE leaving OPEC is not simply the story of one member departing an organization. It reflects visible cracks in the old oil order, where national interests are beginning to outweigh collective discipline. If that trend spreads, global energy markets could enter a new era of volatility, one where oil prices are driven more by internal competition than by coordinated restraint. Ukraine strikes deep into Russia. The war is shifting to the rear areas. While the Middle East continues to heat up amid the US-Iran confrontation, another front is also intensifying in Eastern Europe. The latest developments suggest Ukraine is expanding its deep strike strategy, aiming not only to inflict damage at the front line, but also to force Russia to disperse resources in defense of its rear areas. According to the report cited, Ukrainian Special Operations Forces carried out a UAV strike in the early hours of April 28th against a Russian Iskander missile system storage site in Crimea. The target was reportedly located roughly 40 kilometers east of Sevastopol inside a fortified military facility previously used to deploy tactical missile systems. If fully confirmed, the strike would matter far beyond the physical damage caused. The Iskander system has long been one of Moscow's most important short-range strike tools, frequently used against military infrastructure, logistics depots, and urban areas inside Ukraine. Targeting the storage and deployment hub of that weapon suggests Kiev is trying to hit Russia's firepower supply chain rather than simply intercept individual launches. Put simply, Ukraine is not just trying to shoot down the arrow, it is trying to break the quiver. Sources also said a large fire erupted after the strike, with heat signatures reportedly visible for several hours. If confirmed, that would indicate potentially serious damage, especially if warheads, fuel, or technical equipment inside the site were affected. Alongside attacks on missile infrastructure, Ukraine is also continuing its campaign against Russia's air defense network. Another report said UAV units from the 429th Brigade destroyed a Kasta 2 E-2 radar near Belgorod Oblast, approximately 80 kilometers from the Ukrainian border. The system's estimated value was reported at around $60 million. Early warning radar may not be as visible a target as fighter aircraft or tanks, but its battlefield value is enormous. It serves as the eyes of the air defense network, tasked with detecting aircraft, missiles, and UAVs at long range, including low-flying targets. When radar is destroyed, early detection weakens, reaction time shortens, and the entire defensive layer behind it becomes more vulnerable. This is a highly efficient Ukrainian approach, using low-cost drones to neutralize high-value assets, steadily increasing the defensive burden on Moscow. According to descriptions of the strike, the operation unfolded in two phases. Reconnaissance UAVs first identified the target, followed by loitering or kamikaze drones striking the radar antenna module. That reflects the growing sophistication of Ukraine's unmanned forces, where surveillance, target designation, and attack are increasingly integrated into a single operational cycle. In recent months, other Russian air defense systems such as the S-350, Buk missile system, Tor M2, and OSA missile system have also reportedly been targeted in similar strikes. If that trend continues, Ukraine may gradually open more favorable operating corridors for long-range UAVs, cruise missiles, and potentially even air power in the future. For Russia, the challenge is no longer limited to replacing destroyed equipment. It now includes defending an increasingly wide operational area. From the Donbas front line to Crimea, and from border regions such as Belgorod to deeper rear area bases, Moscow is being forced to defend more targets at the same time. That requires dispersing radars, surface-to-air missiles, technical personnel, and logistical resources. In modern warfare, this is a form of strategic attrition. You do not need to break the entire front line. You only need to force the enemy to defend everywhere at once, at steadily rising cost. Operationally, this strategy allows Ukraine to leverage technology and flexibility instead of confronting Russia directly with conventional firepower. Kyiv understands it cannot easily match Russia in artillery volume or manpower, so it is using UAVs as a tool to rebalance the battlefield. At this stage, the war is no longer confined to trenches and frontline combat. It is shifting toward missile depots, early warning radars, logistics hubs, and the social psychology behind the lines. Ukraine is attempting to turn low-cost technology into strategic leverage, forcing Russia to defend a wider and more expensive battle space. If that trend continues, Russia's rear areas could become the next major front in this war of attrition. From Tehran to Moscow, from oil markets to the battlefields of Eastern Europe, major shifts are unfolding at the same time, and they could help shape the global balance in the months ahead. In your view, which flashpoint is the most dangerous right now? Iran, Russia, or a global energy shock? Leave your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for the latest updates.